In this lesson, we'll learn how to get started painting the realistic body of water in our scene. All right, so in the last lesson, we left off after we brought in the vegetation in our midground here. So we've got some on the left, we've got some on the right here. Now, in between lessons, I was looking at this vegetation, really thinking that, man, the colors don't look quite right to me. So I've made a few adjustments using adjustment layers here. And I want to just quickly review those with you. So again, we've used these adjustment layers for the most part in previous lessons, but focusing here on the vegetation on the right, you can see here that I've used a hue saturation adjustment layer to warm this this vegetation up, and I've also used a brightness contrast adjustment layer here to if I double click on this little circle, you'll see that I dropped both the brightness and the contrast down, in the case of the contrast, quite a bit. So now the next adjustment layer I've used here, I don't believe we've used it yet in this course. Hopefully you have used the levels adjustment here. So if we double click on that, you'll see here a histogram of all the luminance values in this particular layer. So you can see black pixels are down here, white pixels are over here, and you've got your gray pixels in the middle. All right, now I've done a couple of different things to this levels adjustment. First, I've adjusted this midpoint. I've moved it to the right of center just a little bit, and in doing that, I've put more pixels on the black side. So in effect, that's darkened things up a little. You can see that if I drag that to the right, we're starting to include more and more pixels in the black half of the spectrum. So I've dragged that just a little bit. I've also dragged this slider down here, the white arrow. This is controlling how bright the whites can get in my image. You can see here that if I crank that all the way back up, those whites get awful bright here and just really dominant. So by doing that, I've essentially reduced the contrast a little bit more by pulling the whites down into more of the midtones. So use the levels adjustment to do that. Now over here on the left, if we look at this, I've only used one adjustment over here. Now if I come in and show that, you'll see here that basically what this is doing is, again, muting the colors a little bit and dropping the contrast of this vegetation on the left. So this is a curves adjustment. And if you want to learn more about the curves adjustment, you might check out our introduction to Photoshop. We go over it in quite a bit of detail, but essentially we have here a color curve. And by adjusting the channels up here, you can see I've selected all three channels at once, and I've drug on this histogram, just kind of like in the levels adjustment, I've drug these mid-tone values down just a little bit. So if I drag those back up, you can see they get brighter, but if I drag them down, they get darker. So I've drug those down a little bit. I think I may have even bumped up the darks just a hair. So essentially we've kind of got the same effect as these three adjustment layers over here combined. So with that said, both of those two pieces of vegetation are looking pretty good, and I'm ready to move on to the water. So, you know, I hear a lot of people say that when they go to paint water, they just don't know where to start. Well, let me show you where I start, and it's right here. In this water group, if I bring that in, you'll see I have a water base layer. And essentially what I've done here is I've taken my brush, not a fancy brush, just a hard round opacity brush, which means if we look at the brush dynamics, you'll see that I have the shape dynamics and transfer turned on and opacity jitter set to pin pressure. But basically, my mentality in doing this water is, well, the first problem, or the first question I need to answer is, where's the water and where is not the water? So what I've done here, just using a dark color, is I've silhouetted where I want my water to lie. And this is really important to get right, because if you paint the water and it doesn't match the perspective that you're viewing your image at, then you're already starting off on the wrong foot. So go ahead and use that if you haven't already, and paint in a silhouette of your water. But really the next and most key thing about painting realistic water is the reflection. Water reflects the things around it. So let's come over here and kind of take a look at what's going on around it. We've got vegetation over here. Over here in the far bits of the water, we've got maybe the building that could be reflected into it. So we need to bring in those colors around that are going to be reflected. Let me just make a new layer here first. We'll come in and just call this something like watercolor. And again, I'm going to use that exact same brush, that hard round opacity, and I'll just increase the size of that by holding Alt and right clicking and then dragging. Now, it's probably going to help you before you begin adding in color to determine where the silhouette of the trees is going to be. So let's just hold Alt and sample maybe this dark color or this light gray over here of the pavement. And I'm just going to simply draw a real light line here. Let's shrink that down a little. Maybe something like this. So maybe this is what we want our tree line to be. I actually don't like that right there. Let me just make that a little more tree looking. There we go. So maybe this is where we want our reflection to be. So now we know where the color from the trees and the bushes, the greens, should fall versus what's outside that line, which should be other things. Maybe the sky is going to create part of this reflection as well. So let's go back to our hard round opacity brush and just begin sampling and blotting in some color here. So I'm going to just come in and do this really quickly. And I'm not making big broad strokes as I'm doing this. That's important to note. What I'm doing here is I'm simply dabbing at it. And you can see that my opacity for my brush is not set at 100%. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I want some of this darker color to show through. It'd be real easy to come in here and just fill this area in with different greens. But the reason it's important to have some of that black show through is because there are shadows that get reflected in water as well as the colors of the things around it. So we definitely don't want to completely cover up the black. So you can see here there's maybe some of this lighter green from the grass trimming here. Now obviously there's going to be kind of an overhang at the edge where the vegetation meets the water, so we're going to have to come in and darken that up. But let's come in and again just really quickly blotting in some of this color. Now as we get out here towards our line, we might want to start bringing in colors from the trees. And again, just really focusing kind of on speed here, not necessarily too focused on careful selection of colors. You can see I'm increasing and decreasing the size of my brush just a little bit. Sort of like that. So this is a pretty repetitive process, and I'm just going to kind of fill this area up. But again, I'm sampling from the dark areas as well as the light areas, because we want there to be some level of contrast here. If I feel like an area got too much of the black covered up, we'll bring some back in. Let's come in here. We do want to cover up this line that I drew. So whatever you do, just go ahead and blot enough in to where we don't have that color influencing our reflection, because that's not in the environment, obviously. So we'll come in here just like so. Again, just bringing in some color from the trees. So I brought in lots of color from the trees. Obviously, it's a kind of a tedious process, but it's fairly quick when you sit down and just focus on that. But I want to start bringing in some other colors besides the trees, because over here we've got colors from the building that should probably come into the water. Colors again from the vegetation, maybe a little bit. Colors from the concrete. Over here, we're going to have maybe some colors from the sign. And again, thinking about kind of the perspective. If we were looking at this, kind of the reflection cast here, it should kind of follow this angle here. So we're not casting a reflection straight down onto the water like that. It's going to be skewed and sheared, if you will. So again, coming in here, let's actually bring in some colors from the sky now. So we'll sample some from around the mountains. Bring in some of this bright white from the sky itself. And again, we're going to be doing color correction towards the end of this course, focusing on the big color corrections that need to be made. But for right now, I think that color is not as pivotal as it can be, just simply because we're going to be doing some rather dramatic recoloring with our color correction. But I think that what's more important is the values and the luminance that we're including here. So come in here and get some more tree. So feel free to spend as much time working this particular body of water as you want to. I'm going to go ahead and finish kind of stippling or dotting out these colors over my silhouette. And I tell you what, there's really 2 steps to this. So this is the first half of creating the water. In the next lesson, we'll pick up where we're leaving off here, and we will look at the second half of finishing off our water.